Hi, are you here for the product testings? That's great. Come on in and sit down. We are contracted by numerous companies to test a variety of products. After you complete the product test, you'll receive $100 for your participation. I just have a few demographic questions so that we can find the right test for you. Each of our clients has a variety of needs for different demographics, so I will ask a few questions and see which test is the best fit for you. Is that okay? Wonderful. Let's start with, what is your full name, first and last? And what's your address? What's the zip code? Okay, and your birth date. What gender do you identify? Okay. And what is your ethnicity? You can choose more than one. And your nationality? Okay. What is your first language? This is your native language. Okay. And what is the primary language used in your home? Alright. Is this the primary language that was used in your home as a child? Okay. And do you speak any other languages? What is your relationship status? Single, partner and not living together, partner and living together, married, divorced, widow, would prefer not to say. Alright. And do you have any minor children living in your house? Does anyone under the age of 18? Do you have any minor children not living in your house? This would be if perhaps you had a child that lived with a partner or the other parent. Okay. And how many people total, children and adults, live in your home? What is your highest level of education completed? Some options: did not complete high school or equivalent, some college, completed an associate's degree or trade school, a bachelor's degree, or postgraduate study. I also have some options for this question. What is your employment status? Unemployed and seeking work? Unemployed and not seeking work? Homemaker? Student and not working another job? Student and working? Part-time or full-time employment? And what is your profession? Alright. And the final question, what is your annual household income? Less than 20,000? 20 to 40,000? 40 to 60,000? 60 to 80,000? 80 to 100,000? More than 100,000? test for you. Okay, it looks like you are a perfect demographic fit for a test. We need some people to try new flavors of potato chips. Would you be interested in giving us your opinions on some new chip flavors today? Wonderful. Alright. Now, these flavors aren't yet on the market, and your complete and honest opinions on these flavors are important factors in marketing and sales decisions. I am a neutral independent consultant and unaffiliated with the manufacturer, so please be completely honest. As these products are not currently on the market, confidentiality is important. By continuing with the test today, you agree not to discuss any of the products you've tried. Is that okay? Alright. So today for you, I have 4 different flavors for you to evaluate. I'll open the first one and ask you a few questions about the appearance, and then I'll have you taste them. Does that sound okay? Good. Okay, if you could, just take a look at these chips for me, and I have some questions with multiple choice response options, alright? How do you find the appearance of these chips? Very appetizing, somewhat appetizing, neither appetizing or unappetizing, somewhat unappetizing, or very unappetizing. Okay. How do you find the aroma of these chips? Very appetizing, somewhat appetizing, neither appetizing or unappetizing, somewhat unappetizing, or very unappetizing. Do you have any other thoughts about the look or smell of the chips? And I'll type your response exactly as you say it. Okay, is there anything else? Okay, then you can go ahead and try the chips, please. How would you describe the thickness of these chips? Too thick, somewhat too thick, neither thick or thin, somewhat thin, much too thin. Now, what flavor do you think these chips are? And I'll type your response exactly as you say it. Okay. The flavor is actually called chipotle salsa. Do you think the flavor name is accurate? Is very accurate? Somewhat accurate? Neither accurate or inaccurate? Somewhat inaccurate? Or very inaccurate? Okay. Now, how would you rate the spiciness of these chips? Too spicy? Somewhat too spicy? Just the right amount of spiciness? Needs more spice? Or no spice at all? Okay. And how would you describe the smokiness? Too smoky? Somewhat too smoky? Just the right amount of smoky? Needs a little more smoke? Or not at all smoky? Alright. And how would you describe the saltiness? Much too salty? somewhat too salty, just the right amount of salt, needs a little more salt, or not salt at all. If these chips were available in the local store, how likely are you to buy them instead of your usual chips? Very likely? Somewhat likely? Neither likely or unlikely? Somewhat unlikely? Or very unlikely? Okay. And how likely are you to recommend these chips to friends and family? Very likely? Somewhat likely? Neither likely or unlikely? Somewhat unlikely? Or very unlikely? Alright. And do you have any other comments about the Chipotle salsa chips? Again, I'll record your answers exactly as you say it. Okay, is there anything else? Alright. Would you like a glass of water? Yes. Eating packets of chips, you would need something to drink. There you go. Okay, now I'll open the second packet, and if you can, just take a look and answer some of the same questions as before trying them, okay? Now, how do you find the appearance of these chips? Very appetizing, somewhat appetizing, neither appetizing or unappetizing, somewhat unappetizing, or very unappetizing. Okay. How do you find the aroma of these chips? Very appetizing, somewhat appetizing, neither appetizing or unappetizing, somewhat unappetizing, or very unappetizing. Okay. Do you have any other thoughts about the look or smell of the chips? Alright then, we would go ahead and try the chips. How would you describe the texture of the chips? Much too thick? Somewhat too thick? Neither thick or thin? Somewhat too thin? Or much too thin? Okay. What flavor do you think these chips are? Yes, if you had to pick just any flavor you're familiar with. Okay. The flavor is called bourbon barbecue. Do you think this is an accurate flavor name? Do you think it's very accurate? Somewhat accurate? Neither accurate or inaccurate? Somewhat inaccurate? Or very inaccurate? Okay. And how would you rate the sweetness of these chips? Too sweet? Somewhat too sweet? Just the right amount of sweetness? Needs more sweetness? Or not at all sweet? Okay. How would you describe the smokiness? Much too smoky? somewhat too smoky, just the right amount of smoke, needs a little more smoke, or not at all smoky. Okay. Now, do you taste any of the oak flavors? Do you taste far too much oak, somewhat too much oak, just the right amount of oak, needs more oak, or no oak flavor at all? And how would you describe the saltiness? Much too salty? Somewhat too salty? Just the right amount of salt? Needs a little more salt? Or no salt at all? Okay. If these chips were available in your local store, how likely are you to buy them instead of your usual chips? Very likely? Somewhat likely? Neither likely or unlikely? Somewhat unlikely? Or very unlikely? Okay. And how likely are you to recommend these chips to your friends and family? Very likely? Somewhat likely? Neither likely or unlikely? Somewhat unlikely? Or very unlikely? Okay. Now, do you have any other comments about the bourbon barbecue potato chips? And again, I will type your response exactly as you say it. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Do you need more water? Yes, there's still 2 more. Okay. Alright. There is your water. And I will go ahead and open this 3rd packet. And just like before, if you could please take a look before you eat them. Okay, take a look at these and tell me, how do you find the appearance of these chips? Very appetizing? Somewhat appetizing? Neither appetizing or unappetizing? Somewhat unappetizing? Or very unappetizing? Okay. And how do you find the aroma of these chips? Very appetizing? Somewhat appetizing? Neither appetizing or unappetizing? Somewhat unappetizing? Very unappetizing? Okay. Do you have any other thoughts about the look or smell of the chips today? Alright. If you could go ahead and try the chips. And how would you describe the thickness of the chips? Much too thick? Somewhat too thick? Neither too thick or too thin? Somewhat too thin? Or much too thin? Okay. And now, if you had to pick, what flavor do you think these chips are? The flavor of these chips are sweet and sour. So tell me, how accurate do you think this flavor name is? Very accurate? Somewhat accurate? Neither accurate or inaccurate? Somewhat inaccurate? Or very inaccurate? Okay. Now, how would you rate the sweetness? Much too sweet? Somewhat too sweet? Just the right amount of sweetness? Need some more sweetness? Or not sweet at all? Okay. How would you describe the sour? Is it much too sour? Somewhat too sour? Just the right amount of sour? Or needs a little more sour? Not sour at all? Okay. How would you describe the saltiness? Much too salty? Somewhat too salty? Just the right amount of salt? Needs a little more salt? Or no salt at all? Right? Now, if these chips were available in your local store, how likely are you to buy them instead of your usual chips? Very likely, somewhat likely, neither likely or unlikely, somewhat unlikely, or very unlikely. How likely are you to recommend these chips to friends and family? Very likely, somewhat likely, neither likely or unlikely, somewhat unlikely, or very unlikely. Okay. Do you have any other comments about the sweet and sour chips? Okay, just pour some more water for you there. Alright, this is our last chip flavor today. And just like before, I will open it up, and if you could just take a look before you try them. Okay, now how do you find the appearance of these chips? Very appetizing? Somewhat appetizing? Neither appetizing or unappetizing? Somewhat unappetizing? Very unappetizing? Okay, how do you find the aroma of these chips? Very unappetizing? Somewhat appetizing? Neither appetizing or unappetizing? Somewhat unappetizing? Or very unappetizing? Okay. Do you have any other thoughts about the look or smell of these chips? Alright, if you could please go ahead and give them a try. Tell me how you would describe the thickness of these chips. Much too thick? Somewhat too thick? Neither thick or too thin? Somewhat too thin? Or much too thin? Alright. And now, what flavor do you think these chips are? Okay, this flavor is actually called Asian shrimp. Do you think the flavor name is very accurate, somewhat accurate, neither accurate or inaccurate, somewhat inaccurate, or very inaccurate. Okay. Now, how would you rate the shrimp flavor? Much too shrimpy? Somewhat too much shrimp? Just the right amount of shrimp? Needs more shrimp flavor? Or no shrimp flavor at all? Okay. How would you describe the saltiness? Much too salty? Somewhat too salty? Just the right amount of salt? Or needs a little more salt? Or no salt at all? Okay. If these chips were available in your local store, how likely are you to buy them instead of your usual chips? Very likely? Somewhat likely? Neither likely or unlikely? Somewhat unlikely or very unlikely? How likely are you to recommend these chips to friends and family? Very likely? Somewhat likely? Neither likely or unlikely? Somewhat unlikely or very unlikely? Okay. Do you have any other comments about the shrimp flavored chips you just tried today? Do you have any further comments about any of the flavors you've tried? Okay, is there anything else? Alright, that was the last flavor of chip I had for you. So thank you for participating in the taste test today. Your opinions have provided valuable information. Please remember not to discuss the products you've tested today. And you can pick up your payment at the front desk. Thank you.